Welcome to Nightverse lore! Oh geez, another dimension of naps!
Hey there, sleepyheads, glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. The night the aurora painted impossible colors across Millhaven's sky, something fell to earth not with violence, but with the gentleness of a feather finding its resting place. Where meteorites should have carved scars of fire and twisted metal, there was instead a perfect circle of moss that glowed like captured moonlight, humming with a sound that felt more like memory than music, the kind of lullaby a grandmother might have sung in a language no one quite remembered, but everyone somehow understood. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the crater as dawn was, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, her medical bag clutched in one hand, her other hand shielding her eyes against the soft luminescence rising from the earth. She had expected destruction, had prepared herself for the usual aftermath of things that fall too fast from too high. Instead, she found herself kneeling at the edge of what looked more like a nursery than an impact site, where moss pulsed gently with its own inner light, and the air itself seemed to exhale peace. In the center of this glowing cradle lay a child, no older than 5, sleeping with the kind of profound stillness that spoke of dreams so beautiful they were worth holding on to. Their hair caught the aurora's lingering colors, shifting from deep brown to threads of green and gold, and their small chest rose and fell with the rhythm of someone who had never known fear. Eleanor, who had delivered half the town and mended the other half, had seen her share of mysteries, but nothing had prepared her for the way her own heartbeat slowed just from watching this child sleep. The moss beneath her knees felt warm and springy, like the most perfect mattress ever woven, and as she reached toward the child, Eleanor noticed something remarkable happening around her. The worry lines that had lived between her eyebrows for the past 15 years seemed to soften. The argument she'd had with the hospital administration, the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table, the constant weight of being the only doctor in a town of 3,000 souls, all of it felt suddenly manageable, like problems that belonged to someone else's story. When her fingers touched the child's forehead, checking for fever or injury, their eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that seemed to shift color like oil on water. There was no startled cry, no confusion or fear, just a quiet recognition that made Elena feel as though she were the one being examined, seen and somehow found worthy. "Hello, little one," Elena whispered, her voice automatically dropping to the soft tone she used with frightened patience. "I'm Elena. Are you hurt anywhere?" The child sat up slowly, the glowing moss dimming slightly as they moved, and shook their head with the kind of ancient calm that made Elena wonder if she was looking at a 5-year-old or someone much, much older. When they spoke, their voice was clear as spring water, carrying no trace of the trauma she would have expected from someone who had just fallen from the sky. "I don't think so," the child said, looking around at the crater with mild curiosity, as if waking up in glowing moss was the most natural thing in the world. "This feels like a safe place. It feels like home." Elena found herself nodding, though she couldn't have explained why. The crater did feel safe, impossibly so, like being wrapped in the world's most comforting blanket. She had responded to the emergency call expecting chaos, prepared for the worst, and instead found herself feeling more peaceful than she had in months. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked, helping the child to their feet. The moss beneath them pulsed brighter for a moment, as if responding to the movement, then settled back to its gentle glow. The child considered this question with the seriousness of someone consulting an internal compass, tilting their head as if listening to something Elena couldn't hear. "Sage," they said finally, the name settling into the air like a perfect note finding its harmony. "I think my name is Sage," Eleanor smiled, something about the name feeling exactly right, like a word she'd been searching for without knowing it. As they climbed out of the crater together, she noticed the glowing moss beginning to fade, not dying but sinking back into the earth, leaving behind soil so rich and dark it looked ready to grow anything planted in it. By the time they reached her truck, the crater looked like nothing more than a perfectly circular garden bed, waiting for spring. During the drive back to town, Eleanor kept glancing in her rearview mirror at Sage, who sat quietly in the back seat, watching the sunrise paint the world in gentle colors. There was something about the child's presence that made the familiar drive feel different, more hopeful somehow. Even her old truck seemed to run more smoothly, the engine's usual complaints replaced by a contented purr. "Where will I stay?" Sage asked as they pulled into Elena's driveway, the question matter-of-fact rather than worried, as if they already knew the answer. Elena had been wondering the same thing. Protocol said she should contact social services, file reports, try to track down the child's family. But something deeper than protocol was guiding her now. The same instinct that had made her a good doctor, the ability to recognize what someone truly needed. "With me, say if you'd like," she heard herself saying. "At least until we figure things out." Sage smiled then, the first truly childlike expression Elena had seen from them. Bright and trusting and full of quiet joy that made Elena's heart feel suddenly, impossibly light. "I'd like that very much." As they walked toward the house together, Elena felt a strange certainty settling over her, the kind of knowing that comes not from the mind, but from somewhere much deeper. This child who had fallen from an aurora-painted sky, who slept in craters of singing moss, who carried peace like other people carried worry, Sage was going to change everything. That first night in Elena's house, Sage slept with the profound stillness of someone who had finally found their proper place in the world. Elena checked on them twice, drawn by the unusual quiet that had settled over her home like fresh snow, muffling the familiar creaks and sighs that usually marked the passage of hours. Even Nimbus, her ancient Persian cat who typically spent nights prowling and complaining, had curled up at the foot of Sage's bed, purring with a contentment Elena hadn't heard in years. The morning brought simple rituals that felt surprisingly natural. Sage learned where the cereal lived, how the kitchen window caught the early light, and that Elena hummed old folk songs while making coffee. They moved through the house with careful attention, absorbing the rhythm of this new life, like a plant learning the pattern of sun and shadow. When Elena packed her medical bag for the day's rounds, Sage watched with the quiet intensity of someone memorizing something precious. "Would you like to come with me to the clinic today?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the invitation. "Just until we get you enrolled in school." Sage nodded, and something in their smile made Elena feel as though she'd just made the most important decision of her life. The clinic waiting room had always carried a particular weight. The accumulated anxiety of people in pain, the restless energy of worried parents, the thick atmosphere of fear that seemed to cling to the fluorescent lights. But as Sage settled into a corner chair with a coloring book, Elena noticed something remarkable happening. Mrs. Patterson, who usually fidgeted through entire appointments, found herself breathing more deeply. The Miller twins, notorious for their pre-vaccination screaming, sat quietly building towers with wooden blocks, their usual terror replaced by curious calm. It was during lunch that Elena witnessed something that would change everything she thought she knew about healing. Old Mr. Hendricks had arrived in obvious distress, not from physical pain but from the kind of deep, bone-weary sadness that follows loss. His wife of 50 years had passed the previous month, and grief had settled over him like a heavy coat he couldn't remove. Elena had been treating his insomnia and loss of appetite, but medicine could only do so much for a broken heart. Sage looked up from their drawing as Mr. Hendricks sat down, the child's eyes reflecting something far older than their years. Without being asked, Sage walked over and simply sat in the chair beside him, small hands folded in their lap, offering nothing more than quiet presence. Elena watched from the doorway as something extraordinary unfolded. The tight lines around Mr. Hendricks' eyes began to soften. His hunched shoulders gradually straightened. The tremor in his hands, a manifestation of his anxiety, slowly stilled. Most remarkably, for the first time since his wife's funeral, the old man smiled, a small wondering expression that transformed his entire face. "You remind me of my Margaret when she was little," he told Sage, his voice carrying warmth instead of the hollow echo it had held for weeks. "She had that same way of making everything feel possible." Sage simply nodded as if receiving a gift, and Elena realized she was witnessing something far beyond conventional medicine. This wasn't healing in any traditional sense. Mr. Hendricks's grief remained, would always remain, but somehow Sage had made it bearable, had transformed crushing sorrow into something that could be carried with dignity. That evening, as they shared soup and bread at Eleanor's kitchen table, she began asking gentle questions. "Do you feel what other people feel, sweetheart?" Sage considered this, stirring their soup thoughtfully. "Not exactly feel," they said finally. More like, I can see the colors of their feelings. Mr. Hendrix's sadness was very dark blue, almost black. But underneath there was still gold, all the love he has for his wife. I just helped him remember the gold was still there. Elena felt her heart expand with wonder and concern in equal measure. That's a beautiful gift, Sage. But it's important that you don't carry everyone's feelings home with you. Some colors are too heavy for one person to hold. Over the following days, Elena began teaching Sage what she thought of as emotional hygiene. Simple practices to help them maintain their own sense of self while helping others. They developed bedtime rituals of releasing any absorbed emotions, imagining them as leaves floating away on a gentle stream. Elena showed Sage how to recognize when they were taking on too much, how to step back and breathe, how to offer comfort without losing themselves in others' pain. School came the next week, and with it new challenges. Sage's teacher, Mrs. Chen, noted how arguments seemed to resolve themselves more quickly when Sage was nearby, how the classroom's usual chaos settled into something more manageable. A boy named David, known for his explosive temper, found his anger dissolving into confusion whenever he approached Sage with hostile intent, leaving him scratching his head and wandering away to find something else to occupy his attention. Elena began keeping careful notes, not as a scientist studying a phenomenon, but as a guardian documenting a miracle. She wrote about the way injured birds sought out their porch, how they would rest peacefully in Sage's gentle hands, their fear transformed into trust. She documented the subtle changes in her patients, the way chronic pain became more manageable, how anxiety attacks grew less frequent, how the overall atmosphere of her practice had shifted from one of suffering to one of healing. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Elena realized that Sage hadn't just found a home with her, they had brought home to everyone they touched, creating a sanctuary of peace in a world that desperately needed it. The pull toward the coastline began as winter settled over Millhaven, a gentle tugging that Sage felt most strongly during the quiet hours after school, when the clinic's emotional residue still clung to their small shoulders like invisible fog. Elena noticed the way Sage would stand at the kitchen window, gazing toward the distant lighthouse that crowned the rocky peninsula, their expression holding the same distant listening quality they'd worn that first morning in the glowing crater. "Something's calling from out there," Sage said one gray December afternoon, breath fogging the glass as they pressed closer to the window. "It feels like someone who understands the colors." Elena had heard the stories about old Marcus, the lighthouse keeper, who'd stayed on long after the beacon was decommissioned, maintaining the tower with a devotion that puzzled the practical-minded townspeople. Some said he was simply stubborn, others whispered about the strange way troubled souls seemed drawn to his doorstep, always leaving calmer than they'd arrived. Elena had treated him once for a minor injury, and remembered eyes that held the same deep stillness she'd come to. Recognize in Sage out the path to the lighthouse, wound through salt-weathered rocks and patches of hardy grass, that bent but never broke in the constant wind. Sage moved along it with unusual certainty, as if their feet remembered steps they'd never taken, while Elena followed, carrying a thermos of hot chocolate, and the growing conviction that this visit had been inevitable from the moment Sage first looked toward the sea. Marcus emerged from the lighthouse cottage before they'd even knocked, a tall man whose white hair caught the afternoon light like sea foam. His weathered face creased into a smile of recognition, not surprise, as if he'd been expecting them for years rather than minutes. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, nodding to Elena before turning to Sage, with eyes that reflected decades of watching storms, both meteorological and emotional. "And you must be the child who carries peace like other folks carry worry." Sage tilted their head with that characteristic curiosity. "How did you know?" "Same way you know when someone's heart is heavy before they tell you," Marcus replied, settling onto a driftwood bench worn smooth by countless conversations. "Some of us are built to feel the weather in people's souls." As they talked, Elena realized she was witnessing something remarkable, the meeting of two people who spoke the same rare language of empathy. Marcus described his gift in terms that made immediate sense to Sage, the ability to sense approaching emotional storms, to feel the barometric pressure of human suffering, to recognize when someone was about to be overwhelmed by their own inner tempest. "I've been keeping this light for 43 years, Marcus said, gesturing toward the tower that rose behind them like a gentle giant. Ships don't need it anymore, but people still do. Different kind of navigation, same principle, helping folks find their way home to themselves when they're lost in the dark. Inside the lighthouse, the spiral stairs led to a lens room that had been transformed into something between meditation space and sanctuary. The great beacon lens still rotated slowly, but instead of projecting light across the water, it seemed to send out waves of something deeper, comfort perhaps, or simply the profound peace that comes from being truly understood. The light responds to need, Marcus explained, his hand resting on the brass housing with familiar affection. Not electric power, but something else entirely. The same energy you use when you help someone carry their pain. Under Marcus's patient guidance, Sage began to learn the subtle art of emotional weather prediction. There was the sharp, sudden pain of fresh loss like lightning, brilliant and devastating but brief. The dull, persistent ache of chronic loneliness resembled fog, obscuring everything until the sufferer forgot there had ever been clear skies. Then there was the wild, chaotic fear of abandonment, a hurricane of the heart that could destroy everything in its path, if not met with steady, unwavering presence. "We're not here to stop the storms," Marcus taught as they practiced in the lens room, the rotating beam casting gentle shadows on the walls. "We're here to be the lighthouse, steady, reliable, offering safe harbor until the weather passes." Sage learned to extend their natural gift with greater intention, sending out gentle pulses of calm that didn't erase pain, but made it bearable. That transformed isolation into companionship. The lighthouse became their training ground, its ancient rhythms teaching them that healing happened not through force, but through presence. Not through answers, but through the simple, profound act of witnessing another's struggle with compassion. Elena watched these lessons with a mixture of gratitude and gentle sorrow, recognizing that Sage was growing beyond what she could teach. This was right and necessary. She knew, but it still tugged at her heart to see her, found child discovering a purpose that would eventually lead them far from her kitchen table. And morning coffee rituals, as winter deepened and the lighthouse beam painted silver paths across the snow-covered rocks, Sage began to understand that their gift was part of something ancient and ongoing, a quiet tradition of healers who worked not through grand gestures, but through the patient, faithful act of holding space for others' pain until it could transform into something bearable. Marcus gave Sage a small notebook, its pages blank and waiting. "Keep track of what you learn," he said simply. "Not for science, but for remembering. The heart has its own weather patterns, and understanding them helps us serve better." That night, as Eleanor tucked Sage into bed, the child's eyes held a new depth of purpose. "I think I know why I fell from the sky," Sage whispered. "To learn how to be a lighthouse for people who are lost in their own storms." Eleanor kissed their forehead, tasting salt air and possibility. Outside, the real lighthouse beam swept its patient arc across the darkness, and somewhere in its rhythm, she heard the echo of ancient promises being kept, of lights that would never go out as long as there were souls who needed guidance home. The morning Sage turned 17. Marcus found them standing in the lens room before dawn, watching the beam paint silver paths across water that held the deep blue of approaching change. The lighthouse keeper had learned to read these moments over the decades, the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath before significant arrivals, the subtle shift in the rhythm of waves against rock that spoke of destinies converging. "They're coming today," Sage said quietly, their voice carrying the certainty of someone who had learned to feel tomorrow's weather in today's wind. 3 of them. "They think they're coming to ask for help, but they're really coming to remember how to rest." Marcus nodded, understanding flowing between them like the familiar comfort of shared silence. 17 years of guidance had taught him that Sage's intuitions about human hearts were as reliable as the lighthouse beam itself, steady and true even in the deepest darkness. The visitors arrived not with the fanfare one might expect from legendary heroes, but in a battered van that wheezed up the coastal road like something held together more by hope than mechanics. Through the cottage window, Sage watched 3 figures emerge with the careful movements of people who had carried too much weight for too long. Their clothes were ordinary, worn jeans, faded jackets, the kind of comfortable anonymity that spoke of souls tired of being recognized, of being needed by everyone except themselves. Captain Stella stepped out first, her silver-streaked hair catching the morning light in a way that hinted at the cosmic awareness that had once connected her to distant stars. But where that connection had once been a source of strength, now it flickered uncertainly, leaving her feeling untethered from the universe she'd spent decades protecting. Her eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone who had seen too much of infinity and lost track of the simple pleasure of watching a single sunrise. Echo followed, her movements creating subtle ripples in the air around her, as if she existed slightly out of phase with the world. Her reality-bending gifts had left her struggling to distinguish between what was real and what might be, between the present moment and the 1,000 possible versions of it that crowded her perception. She pressed her fingers to her temples in a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing, trying to anchor herself in this single timeline. This one precious now Mindbridge emerged last, his compact frame carrying the invisible weight of a telepathy that had transformed from gift to burden. The careful walls he'd built around his thoughts were visible in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself apart even in the open air. Years of hearing humanity's darkest thoughts had left him seeking silence the way a drowning person seeks air, desperate for the simple peace of his own mind. Marcus opened the door before they could knock, his weathered face creasing into the kind of smile reserved for travelers who had journeyed far to find something they hadn't known they were seeking. "Captain Stella," he said, as if welcoming an old friend rather than meeting a legend. "Echo, Mindbridge, you're just in time for breakfast." They had come with a mission, of course. In the lighthouse's warm kitchen, over Elena's homemade bread and coffee that tasted of patience, they spoke of threats that lingered in the shadows between realities, of a darkness that required one final gathering of heroes. They had heard of Sage's gifts, they said, and hoped to recruit someone young and strong enough to help them face what they could no longer handle alone. But as they spoke, something remarkable began to happen. Captain Stella's cosmic awareness, instead of straining to reach across impossible distances, settled into the simple awareness of this moment, the warmth of the cup in her hands, the taste of honey on fresh bread, the sound of waves against rocks that had stood steady for millennia. The constant flicker of her fading powers stabilized, not with renewed strength, but with acceptance. Echo found her multiple perceptions beginning to converge, the 1,000 possible timelines narrowing to this single, solid reality where she sat at a wooden table, with people who saw her not as a weapon or a tool, but simply as someone who needed a safe place to rest. The tremor in her hands, born of existing in too many places at once, gradually stilled. Mindbridge felt the cacophony of distant thoughts growing quieter, not because his telepathy was failing, but because Sage's presence created a buffer of peace around him, a sanctuary where his own mind could remember what silence felt like. For the first time in years, his thoughts were his own. "You didn't come here to recruit me," Sage said gently, understanding flooding through them like sunrise. "You came here because you've forgotten how to stop being heroes long enough to remember how to be human." The words settled into the kitchen's warmth like seeds finding fertile ground. Captain Stella's shoulders dropped as she released a breath she'd been holding for decades. Echo's eyes focused on the present moment with wonder, as if seeing the world clearly for the first time in years. Mindbridge smiled, actually smiled, at the profound relief of existing in his own headspace without intrusion. Over the following days, something unprecedented unfolded. The legendary Vindicators, who had spent their lives responding to crises with immediate action, learned the art of simply being present. They helped Marcus maintain the lighthouse, not because the world needed saving, but because the gentle rhythm of caring for something beautiful brought its own healing. They discovered that their gifts, when not wielded as weapons against darkness, could serve gentler purposes. Echo's reality-shifting abilities created comforting illusions for trauma survivors, glimpses of deceased loved ones offering final words of love, visions of peaceful futures that helped hearts remember hope. Captain Stella's fading cosmic awareness proved perfect for sensing souls on the edge of despair, allowing for intervention through presence rather than force. As the lighthouse beam swept its patient arc each night, 4 generations of healers found their purposes converging into something larger than heroism. The quiet, revolutionary act of teaching the world that strength could be gentle, that power could heal rather than destroy, and that sometimes the greatest victory was simply helping someone remember they were not alone. The mission they had come for remained, but transformed. They would face the darkness, yes, but not as warriors charging into battle. They would meet it as lighthouse keepers, offering steady beacons of hope to guide lost souls safely home. The transformation began not with fanfare, but with footsteps on hospital linoleum, the soft percussion of 4 souls learning to walk differently through a world they had once tried to save with force. Sage led them down corridors that hummed with more than fluorescent lights, the accumulated weight of human suffering, invisible but as real as the walls themselves. Captain Stella felt it first, her cosmic awareness no longer reaching for distant galaxies but settling into the intimate geography of broken hearts and restless minds. The veterans' wing welcomed them with the particular silence of people who had learned to carry storms inside themselves. Sage moved between the beds like a gentle current, their presence creating pools of calm where nightmares had ruled for years. A young soldier named Marcus, not their lighthouse keeper, but someone who shared his steady strength, had been fighting the same battle every night since coming home. His hands shook not from injury, but from the weight of memories that played on endless loop. Echo approached his bedside with the reverence of someone who understood that reality could be both blessing and curse. She didn't create grand illusions, but something softer, the faint scent of his mother's kitchen, the distant sound of rain on a childhood roof, gentle echoes of safety that his mind could choose to embrace or release. For the first time in months, Marcus's breathing deepened, his clenched fists relaxing as sleep found him without dragging. Nightmares in its wake. Captain Stella discovered that her fading cosmic powers had evolved into something more precious. The ability to sense when someone stood at the edge of giving up entirely. She would appear at bedsides just as despair threatened to overwhelm hope, not with speeches or solutions, but with the simple presence of someone who had also felt lost among the stars and found her way back to human warmth. Mindbridge learned to use his telepathy not as invasion, but as invitation, creating spaces of profound quiet where racing thoughts could finally rest. He sat with a veteran whose mind had become a battlefield of anxiety, offering not answers but the gift of being truly heard, truly understood. Without judgment or the need for words, their work expanded like ripples on still water. The Grief Counseling Center became another sanctuary, where Echo's gentle touch helped the bereaved glimpse their loved ones, not as they had been in final, painful moments, but as they lived in joy, offering words of love and release that hearts desperately needed to hear. A widow felt her husband's presence one last time, not as haunting but as blessing, the kind of goodbye that makes letting go possible. At the children's hospital, Sage's gift transformed waiting rooms where fear had taken root. Young patients who had withdrawn into themselves began to smile again, not because their illnesses vanished, but because their terror had been transmuted into something manageable. Parents who had been drowning in worry found themselves able to breathe, to remember that love was stronger than fear. The team learned that their greatest victories would never make headlines. There were no dramatic rescues, no cities saved from destruction. Instead, there were quiet resurrections. The homeless man who decided to try again, the teenager who put down the bottle of pills, the couple who remembered why they had fallen in love before grief tried to tear them apart. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and promise, their reputation spread not through news reports, but through whispered gratitude. Through the way, communities began to breathe a little easier. They worked in shelters where Captain Stella's sensitivity helped identify those most at risk of surrendering hope entirely. They visited schools where bullying had created climates of fear, watching as Sage's presence somehow diffused the anger that drove cruelty, replacing it with confused recognition that everyone was struggling with something. It was during one of these quiet missions that Sage first noticed the ambulance parked near the harbor, its lights dimmed after what had clearly been a difficult call. The paramedic leaning against its bumper carried colors Sage recognized, the silver thread of someone who felt others' pain as their own, the gentle gold of competence wrapped around a core of tender humor that kept trying to surface despite exhaustion. River looked up as Sage approached, their name badge catching the last light of evening. There was something in their eyes that spoke of long days spent carrying others' emergencies, of hands that had learned to be steady, even when the heart was breaking for strangers who became, for brief moments, the most important people in the world. Long day, Sage asked, voice carrying the particular gentleness reserved for fellow travelers on the path of caring too much. River's smile was tired but genuine, touched with the kind of recognition that happens when two people who understand the weight of empathy find each other in the growing dusk. "They're all long," River said, "but some are worth it." The lighthouse beam swept across the harbor, pausing as if acknowledging two healers who had found the same shore, then continued its patient rotation. Sage felt something new stirring in their chest, not the absorbed pain of others, but something entirely their own, warm and uncertain and full of possibility. The night folded around them like a gentle invitation, the sea whispering its ancient lullaby as stars began their watch. And somewhere in the distance, the lighthouse continued its faithful vigil, guiding all lost souls safely home. The lighthouse beam swept across the harbor like a gentle benediction, and in its passing light, River's tired smile transformed into something more open, more hopeful. Their conversation had been brief, but it carried the weight of recognition. Two souls who understood the peculiar burden of feeling too much in a world that often felt too harsh. River returned the next evening, not answering an emergency call, but following an instinct they couldn't name. Sage met them at the cottage door with tea already steeping, as if they had been expecting this visit since the moment River's ambulance had first disappeared down the coastal road. "I keep thinking about what you said," River began, settling into the worn chair that seemed to have been waiting for them, "about being a lighthouse for people lost in storms. I've been doing that work for years, but I never had words for it." They talked through the evening, sharing the peculiar experiences of people whose hearts had been built too open. River described the weight of carrying strangers' final moments, the way emergency calls left emotional residue that accumulated like dust in forgotten corners. Sage listened with the deep attention of someone who understood not just the words, but the colors beneath them, the silver thread of compassion running through River's exhaustion, the gold of humor that kept surfacing even in the darkest stories. "Do you ever feel like you're drowning in it all?" River asked as they walked the shoreline together, feet finding rhythm on stones worn smooth by countless tides. "Every day," Sage admitted, "until Marcus taught me that lighthouses don't fight the storms. They just keep shining through them." River stopped walking, something in Sage's words creating a shift that felt fundamental. "You make it sound like a gift instead of a burden." "Maybe it's both," Sage replied, taking River's hand with natural ease. "Maybe that's what makes it worth carrying." Over the following weeks, River began teaching Sage practical lessons about sustainable compassion. "Empathy is a muscle," River explained one afternoon, demonstrating stretches that released tension from shoulders that carried too much worry. "If we don't care for it properly, it tears." They showed Sage how to recognize emotional overload before it became dangerous, the importance of rest that went deeper than sleep, and the profound medicine of shared laughter. Sage, in return, taught River about transmuting absorbed pain. In the lighthouse's lens room, as the beam made its patient rotation, they practiced together, River learning to release the trauma of difficult calls, Sage showing how to transform the weight of others' suffering into something that strengthened rather than depleted. The lighthouse community embraced River with the warmth reserved for family. Marcus watched their growing connection with eyes that had seen many storms, and recognized the rare peace that comes when two lighthouses find they can share the same shore. Echo discovered in River someone who understood the disorientation of existing between worlds, the constant shifting between crisis and calm. Captain Stella appreciated River's grounded presence, the way their practical knowledge complemented her cosmic awareness. Mindbridge found that River's mind held the particular clarity that comes from emergency training, thoughts organized in ways that made telepathic connection feel like conversation rather than invasion. During quiet talks, River helped him understand that hearing others' thoughts wasn't so different from responding to emergency calls. Both required remaining calm while others panicked. Their love grew in spaces between emergencies, in quiet moments, stolen from a world that seemed to create pain faster than it could heal it. They created rituals together. After particularly difficult calls, River would come to the lighthouse, and they would sit in the lens room as the beam rotated, each sweep carrying away the residue of pain until only essential compassion remained. River's small apartment gradually emptied as belongings migrated to the lighthouse cottage. not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the natural accumulation of shared mornings, a spare toothbrush appearing in the bathroom, favorite books finding shelf space, the coffee maker that knew exactly how River liked their morning brew. They learned to tend each other's wounds with the same gentle attention they brought to strangers. Sage discovered what it meant to be cared for rather than always caring, while River found someone who could absorb their professional burdens and transform them into something bearable. Together, they created a sanctuary where two healers could be vulnerable, could rest, could remember what it felt like to simply exist without constantly serving. One evening, as they prepared dinner together in the lighthouse kitchen, River paused in chopping vegetables to watch Sage move through the familiar space. "I used to think love was supposed to be overwhelming," River said quietly. "All passion and drama. But this feels different. It feels like coming home to myself." Sage smiled, understanding flowing between them like the tide. "Marcus told me once that the best lighthouses don't create light. They just help it shine where it's needed most. Maybe that's what we do for each other." The lighthouse beam continued its faithful rotation, now illuminating not just one soul called to service, but two hearts that had found in each other the perfect complement to their shared calling. Their love became another kind of beacon, showing others that healing could be mutual. The two people committed to serving the world could also create something beautiful and sustaining for themselves. As spring approached and the first green shoots appeared in Marcus's garden, River and Sage had learned the most important lesson of all, that love itself could be a form of healing, practiced with intention and care, steady as a lighthouse beam, guiding lost souls safely home. Spring arrived with the patience of someone who had learned to wait, green returning to the coastal cliffs in gentle whispers rather than bold declarations. The first signs of change in Marcus came just as subtly. A longer pause at the top of the lighthouse stairs, hands that trembled slightly as they adjusted the great lens, a new quality to his silence that spoke of someone preparing for a journey only he could see. Sage felt it first, their gift for reading emotional weather, extending to the quiet shifts in Marcus's life force. Where once his presence had been steady as the lighthouse beam itself, now there was a gentle flickering, like candlelight in a soft breeze, still bright, still warm, but somehow more precious for its fragility. River noticed too, their medical training recognizing the signs of a body beginning the natural process of letting go, heart rhythms changing like tides responding to a distant moon. Elena arrived more frequently, her doctor's bag filled with comfort rather than cures. Understanding that some journeys couldn't be redirected, only made more peaceful. She brought broths that tasted of patience and gentle tonics that eased discomfort without fighting the inevitable. Marcus accepted her care with the grace of someone who had spent decades tending others, finally allowing himself to be tended in return. "The lighthouse has been waiting for you since before you fell from that aurora," Marcus told Sage one evening, as they sat watching the beam paint silver paths across water that held the deep blue of approaching summer. His voice carried the weight of years and the lightness of someone who had made peace with endings. "I've just been keeping it warm." As the days lengthened, Marcus began sharing secrets that had been held in the lighthouse's stone walls for generations. He revealed a wooden box, its brass hinges worn smooth by countless openings, containing treasures that spoke of continuity rather than conclusion. A lighthouse key, whose metal had been warmed by decades of faithful hands. A leather journal filled with careful notations about souls guided safely home. A ship's whistle that had called through fog both meteorological and emotional. "The journal is the most important," Marcus explained, his weathered fingers tracing entries that spanned continents and decades. Names, places, small harbors where others like us keep their own lights burning. A teacher in Vermont who hums anxiety away from her students. A baker in Morocco whose bread carries the warmth of unspoken understanding. A librarian in Tokyo who knows exactly which story will heal which broken heart. Sage touched the journal with reverence, feeling the compressed weight of lives within its pages. This wasn't just about one lighthouse, they realized, but about a network of quiet guardians who had been healing the world through small acts of compassion for generations. No grand organization, no secret headquarters, just individuals who had learned to transform their sensitivity into service. The lighthouse community gathered closer during these precious weeks, each member understanding without words that they were witnessing something sacred. Echo used her gifts to create gentle illusions of Marcus's past, glimpses of storms weathered, souls guided to safety, moments of quiet triumph that had shaped decades of faithful service. Captain Stella's cosmic awareness helped her sense exactly when Marcus needed company, and when he preferred solitude, her visits timed with the precision of someone who had learned to read the universe's rhythms. Mindbridge discovered that Marcus's thoughts had achieved the clarity that comes only to those who have made peace with their purpose. The old keeper's mind held no regret, no unfinished business, only deep satisfaction at work well done and love well shared. Their telepathic connection became a source of comfort for both men, Marcus appreciating being truly understood while Mindbridge learned what it meant to touch a consciousness completely at peace. As summer deepened, Marcus worked with Sage to transfer not just the lighthouse's operation, but its deeper purpose. In the lens room, where generations of keepers had tended their beacon, he taught Sage how to attune the light to different frequencies of need, one pattern for souls contemplating surrender, another for hearts broken by loss, a third for minds fractured by trauma. The beam doesn't just guide ships, Marcus explained, his hands steady despite their tremor as he demonstrated the subtle adjustments. It sends messages to others in our network, signals that only we can read. When someone needs help beyond what one lighthouse can provide, we call for reinforcement. River learned alongside them, their medical training adapting to encompass this gentler form of healing. They discovered how to recognize the lighthouse's signals, how to coordinate with the network of quiet guardians who had been protecting vulnerable souls for generations. The end came on a morning when the lighthouse beam had painted particularly beautiful patterns across the dawn sky, as if the light itself was celebrating a life well lived. Marcus passed in his garden chair, surrounded by flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner radiance, his weathered face wearing an expression of deep contentment. In his lap lay a final letter, written in the careful script of someone who understood the weight of words. "The lighthouse is yours now," the letter began, "but you already knew that. You've been its true keeper since the night you fell from the stars. I've simply been the caretaker, keeping it ready for your arrival. Take care of each other, take care of the light, and remember, some storms are too big for one lighthouse to weather alone. That's why we built a network." As they prepared Marcus for his final journey, Sage felt the lighthouse's energy shifting around them, the ancient beacon recognizing its new keeper with the same gentle certainty that had guided lost souls to safety for generations. The light continued its faithful rotation, now carrying forward not just Marcus's legacy, but the promise of healing that would ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water, reaching shores they might never see, but would always touch. The lighthouse settled into its new rhythm with the patience of stone that had weathered countless storms, but Sage felt the weight of inheritance in ways Marcus's gentle teachings hadn't fully prepared them for. His journal became their evening companion, each page revealing the true scope of what they had inherited, not just a beacon but a responsibility that stretched across continents and decades, connecting souls who had learned to transform their sensitivity into service. The first to truly understand the lighthouse's transformation was Echo, who appeared at the cottage door 3 weeks after Marcus's funeral, her reality-shifting abilities fluctuating wildly between dimensions. She had been working with trauma survivors in the city, helping them process memories too painful to face directly when something had gone catastrophically wrong. The accumulated weight of others' nightmares had destabilized her gift, leaving her trapped between multiple versions of reality, unable to anchor herself in any single timeline. "I can see 17 different ways this conversation could go," Echo whispered, her form flickering like candlelight in wind. "In 3 of them I never make it home. In 5 I lose myself completely in someone else's trauma. I can't find the thread back to now." Sage guided Echo to the lens room, where the lighthouse beam's steady rotation provided the kind of reliable, constant that fractured realities needed for navigation. River prepared grounding techniques learned from years of emergency medicine, while they worked together to create what Marcus's journal called a convergence protocol, a careful orchestration of their combined gifts designed to help overwhelmed empaths find their way back to themselves. Sage absorbed the overflow of Echo's absorbed trauma, transmuting the nightmares into something manageable, while River offered practical anchoring, the taste of chamomile tea, the texture of a worn blanket, the sound of their own heartbeat. Slowly, Echo's flickering form stabilized, the multiple realities collapsing back into singular presence. She emerged from the experience changed, not weakened, but tempered, like metal that had been tested by fire and found stronger for the trial. "I'd like to stay," Echo said as dawn painted the lighthouse walls in shades of gold and possibility. "If there's room. I think I need to learn how to be steady before I can help others find their balance." The cottage seemed to expand around. Her decision, not through construction, but through the simple magic of space that knows it's needed. Echo chose the room beneath the spiral stairs, where the beam's rotation provided constant, gentle anchoring. She kept the walls bare to reassure her fractured perceptions, then strung a thread of paper cranes where morning light could collect their fluttering calm. Captain Stella arrived during her darkest moments, when her fading cosmic powers made her feel useless in a universe that had once welcomed her touch. She would appear at the lighthouse door, carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had lost their connection to something vast and essential, her eyes holding the hollow echo of stars she could no longer reach. Sage learned to hold space for her profound sense of loss, not offering solutions or platitudes, but simply presence. They would sit together in the lens room, allowing the vastness of her sorrow to wash over them, transforming crushing grief into something that could be carried with dignity. Captain Stella discovered that her fading cosmic awareness had evolved into something more precious, the ability to sense when someone stood at the edge of giving up entirely, making her presence a beacon for souls contemplating surrender. The network Marcus had described began to reveal itself through lighthouse signals that painted coded patterns across night skies. Messages arrived from other beacons, a dream walker in Iceland who helped process collective trauma, a memory keeper in New Zealand who specialized in healing inherited pain, a teacher in Vermont who hummed anxiety away from her students. Each connection strengthened the web of quiet guardians who were healing the world through small acts of compassion. River became the lighthouse's practical anchor, their medical training translating perfectly to this new kind of emergency response. They developed protocols for empathic overload, created care packages for overwhelmed healers, and learned to coordinate with healers whose gifts complemented rather than competed with traditional medicine. Their ambulance began carrying supplies for emotional as well as physical emergencies, blankets that had absorbed the lighthouse's calming energy, water blessed by moon phases that Marcus had taught them to track. As autumn returned to the coastal cliffs, Sage realized they were learning to carry the world's dreams, not as burden, but as sacred trust. Some nights they would stand in the lens room alone, the great beam sweeping its patient arc across darkened waters, sending out waves of calm to anyone who might need them. The cost was often profound exhaustion, but it was also profound purpose, the understanding that their role was not to eliminate suffering, but to make it bearable, to offer steady light until others could find their own way home. Standing in the lens room as another night settled over the world, Sage felt the weight and wonder of their inheritance. The lighthouse beam painted silver paths across the darkness, carrying messages of hope to other beacons, other souls who had chosen to transform their sensitivity into service, creating a network of light that would guide lost souls safely home. The child arrived on a morning when the sea mist hung like gentle veils around the lighthouse, as if the ocean itself had been weaving a cradle for someone precious. Sage felt her presence before seeing her, a small figure, walking the coastal path with the careful determination of someone who had followed, invisible threads across impossible distances, to find exactly where she belonged. Luna's parents had brought her to the lighthouse gate not in abandonment, but in desperate love. Their note explaining what their hearts couldn't bear to speak aloud, their 8-year-old daughter saw emotions as colors that painted the air around people, turning invisible feelings into visible storms that overwhelmed her young mind. They had tried everything their world offered, doctors who prescribed silence for gifts they couldn't understand, Therapists who insisted her perceptions weren't real, leaving Luna isolated in a universe that refused to acknowledge what she could so clearly see. The angry colors hurt, Luna whispered as Sage knelt beside her at the gate, her small hand pointing toward town, where reds and blacks swirled like smoke above the morning traffic. But your colors are warm, like honey with sunlight trapped inside. River appeared with hot chocolate and the kind of practical tenderness that made frightening mornings feel manageable, while Echo emerged from the cottage, wearing the soft smile reserved for souls who understood what it meant to see too much. The lighthouse family gathered around Luna with the natural protectiveness of people who had learned to shelter vulnerable gifts, recognizing in her wide eyes the same bewildered sensitivity they had each carried in their own journeys toward understanding. "She sees what we feel," Echo observed as they watched Luna navigate the cottage, her small hands tracing invisible currents in the air. "The question is whether we can help her see it as a gift rather than a burden." Luna's room became a sanctuary of soft colors and gentle textures, designed to provide respite from the overwhelming emotional spectrum of the outside world. But it was her presence that transformed the lighthouse in ways both profound and practical. Through her eyes, they began to understand their work with entirely new clarity. "Your gold gets muddy when you help too many people without resting," Luna explained one afternoon, her matter-of-fact tone making profound observations sound like simple weather reports. "When you and River sit together, both your colors get brighter. But when you forget to eat, your light goes thin like old paper." Sage felt their heart expand with recognition and gentle revelation. Luna's innocent wisdom cut through years of learned endurance, reminding them of the boundaries Elena had tried to teach so long ago. Through this child's clear sight, Sage saw their gift not as a burden to bear alone, but as a light that shone brightest when properly tended. Captain Stella found in Luna's perceptions a new kind of navigation system. The child could see when someone approached the edge of despair, watching their colors drain toward dangerous grays and blacks. "That man's blue is turning to winter," Luna would say quietly. And Captain Stella would know exactly where her fading cosmic awareness was most needed. Mindbridge discovered that Luna's thoughts held remarkable clarity for someone so young, organized by the visual nature of her gift into patterns that made telepathic contact feel like looking at beautiful paintings rather than wading through chaos. Her pure perception bypassed the surface noise that usually overwhelmed him, allowing connection on deeper, more essential levels. Echo learned to create gentle illusions that helped Luna sort the overwhelming colors she saw, teaching her to categorize emotions rather than simply absorbing their impact. Together, they developed a visual language for different types of suffering. Fresh grief like bright blue ice, old sorrow like deep ocean water, and the purple threads that meant someone was ready to let their pain transform into something else. River incorporated Luna's insights into their emergency work, learning to recognize emotional patterns that preceded medical crises. The child's ability to see when someone was approaching collapse allowed for intervention before physical symptoms manifested, transforming their ambulance into a mobile beacon that could respond to crises of the heart as well as the body. As autumn painted the coastal cliffs in shades of gold and promise, Luna had become not just a member of their family, but a teacher whose wisdom illuminated truths they had been too close to see clearly. She taught them practical magic, how to shine their lights outward instead of absorbing every shadow, how to create boundaries that protected without isolating, how to recognize when rest was not luxury but necessity. One evening, as they prepared dinner together in the lighthouse kitchen, Luna looked up from her drawing to watch Sage move through the familiar space. "I used to think seeing all the colors was scary," she said quietly. "But here everyone's colors make music together. Even the sad colors sound beautiful when they're not alone." The lighthouse beam continued its faithful rotation, now guided by 5 souls who had learned to see the world through different lenses. Sage's transformed absorption of pain, Echo's navigation of multiple realities, Captain Stella's cosmic perspective, River's practical compassion, and Luna's visual translation of invisible feelings. Together, they created a symphony of healing that reached far beyond their rocky shore, painting new possibilities across the emotional landscape of a world that desperately needed more light. Standing in the lens room as another night settled over the world, Sage watched Luna trace the lighthouse beam's path with small fingers that followed colors only she could see in their full spectrum. The child's gift had shown them that their work wasn't just about healing individual souls, but about creating space where every heart, no matter how sensitive, could learn to shine its brightest, most authentic light. The decision emerged like dawn breaking over still water, not with dramatic proclamation, but through quiet conversations that had been gathering in their hearts like morning mist. It began in the lighthouse kitchen, where the legendary Vindicators found themselves sharing Elena's homemade bread and coffee that tasted of patience, their weathered hands wrapped around warm mugs as autumn light painted golden squares. Across the wooden table, Captain Stella was the first to speak the words that had been growing, in all their minds like seeds waiting for the right season. "We've been calling ourselves the Vindicators for 40 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades and the lightness of someone who had found peace with transformation. But what we've become here, what we've learned from Sage and Luna and this place, this isn't vindication anymore. This is something entirely new." Echo nodded from her place by the window, her reality-shifting abilities now stable enough to exist fully in this single precious timeline. "We're not fighting darkness anymore," she said quietly. "We're teaching people how to carry their own light." The formal disbanding happened not in boardrooms or press conferences, but right there in the cottage warmth, with signatures on papers that would transform their legacy from battles won to healing offered. Their final act as traditional superheroes was creating something unprecedented, a network of sanctuaries where vulnerable souls could learn to tend their gifts instead of hiding from them. Mindbridge felt the profound relief that comes when a long-carried burden finally finds its proper resting place. "I've been hearing the world's pain for so long," he said. His telepathy no longer a source of overwhelming noise, but a bridge between hearts that needed connection. "Now I understand why, so I could learn how to help others find the quiet spaces in their own minds." The sanctuary network grew from their shared understanding that healing required not just individual heroes, but entire communities committed to nurturing sensitive souls. Sage's lighthouse became the first official beacon in a constellation of safe havens, each one operated by people who had learned to transform their empathy into service. River coordinated the practical aspects with the same precision they brought to emergency medicine, establishing protocols for identifying overwhelmed empaths and creating supply chains for what they called emotional first aid. Their ambulance became a mobile sanctuary, equipped not just for physical emergencies but for hearts that had absorbed more pain than they could carry alone. Captain Stella's fading cosmic awareness found new purpose in identifying souls who needed the network's support. She sensed a teacher in Vermont whose gift for humming away anxiety had left her feeling isolated, a baker in Morocco whose bread somehow healed hearts but who couldn't understand why customers left his shop feeling mysteriously better, a librarian in Tokyo who always knew exactly which story would mend which broken heart. Echo's reality-shifting abilities proved invaluable in establishing sanctuaries, creating spaces that existed slightly outside normal perception, places where overwhelmed souls could rest without being found by the chaos they were fleeing. She worked with architects of the heart, designing environments that felt safe to people whose gifts made them hypersensitive to their surroundings. The first new sanctuary bloomed in an unused train depot 2 towns over, where Echo painted the waiting benches with soft illusions of morning light, and Captain Stella arranged seating so no one would feel cornered by their own shadows. Mindbridge taught volunteers how to listen without trying to fix, how to let another person's storm pass through without building barriers against it. Luna's visual perception of emotions became the network's most unexpected treasure. Her ability to see feelings as colors allowed them to fine-tune each sanctuary's approach. "That place needs more green," she might say of a new location, meaning more emphasis on growth and renewal. "Too much sharp red there," indicating a need for calming intervention. Her innocent wisdom cut through years of complicated theory, reminding them that healing could be as simple as recognizing what colors someone needed to feel safe. As winter settled over the coastal cliffs, sanctuaries appeared in unexpected places. A bookshop in Prague, where the owner's emotional resonance created reading nooks that mended broken hearts. A community garden in Detroit, where a veteran's gift for absorbing nightmares had transformed into soil, that grew vegetables which nourished both body and spirit. Church basements became listening rooms. School libraries offered corners that felt like safe harbors, and a barbershop in the city provided haircuts and quiet conversation on Thursday nights. The lighthouse remained the network's beating heart, its beam now carrying coded messages that painted hope across night skies in patterns only other healers could read. When someone needed help beyond what one sanctuary could provide, the lighthouse would send its signal, and within hours, support would arrive. A dream walker from Iceland, a memory keeper from New Zealand, a musician from Brazil whose songs could literally heal trauma. Their greatest victory wasn't any single rescue or dramatic intervention, but the slow, steady transformation of how the world treated its most vulnerable souls. Mental health support became more accessible as the network's influence spread through quiet channels. Communities learned to recognize and nurture their own sensitive members rather than trying to silence gifts they didn't understand. Sage stood in the lens room one evening, watching the beam paint silver paths across water that held the deep blue of approaching winter. River joined them at the great lens, their presence a steady anchor in the vast ocean of need they served together. Marcus would be proud, River said quietly, watching the beam carry their message of hope to other beacons scattered across the globe. He knew this would happen, Sage replied, feeling the truth of it in their bones. He was never just keeping the lighthouse. He was keeping the dream alive until we were ready to make it real. The beam continued its faithful rotation, now illuminating not just one sanctuary, but an entire constellation of healing. Each light connected to all the others, in a web of compassion that stretched across continents, proving that some victories are measured not in battles won, but in hearts mended and hope restored to a world learning to be gentle with itself. The years moved like gentle tides around the lighthouse, each season bringing new understanding of what it meant to transform sensitivity into sustainable service. Sage, now in their 30s, had learned to navigate their gift with the practiced grace of someone who had discovered that true strength lay not in endless giving, but in the wisdom of knowing when and how to replenish. The overwhelming absorption of pain that had once threatened to drown them had evolved into something more refined, a gentle alchemy that could transform sorrow into understanding, without losing themselves in the process. River remained their steady anchor, their love deepening like roots that had found the perfect soil. Together, they had built a small annex to the cottage, a sun-drenched space filled with medicinal herbs and comfortable chairs that faced the endless ocean. Here they would retreat after particularly challenging days, performing their own rituals of release. River with practiced breathwork that grounded them both. Sage with gentle absorption of any lingering emotional residue, imagining it as morning mist, dissipating into the vastness of the sea. Luna had grown into a remarkable young woman, whose childhood gift for seeing emotions as colors had matured into something approaching art. She could walk into a room and immediately understand its emotional geography, where to place a chair so no one felt trapped, which corner needed more light to ease anxiety, how to arrange flowers in colors that would calm rather than overwhelm. Her insights had become invaluable to the network, allowing them to tailor support with a precision that bypassed traditional assessments and went straight to the heart of what was truly needed. Empathy isn't about feeling everything, Luna would explain to new arrivals at the lighthouse, her voice carrying the patient warmth of someone who had learned these lessons through lived experience. It's about feeling the right things at the right time, in ways that help rather than harm. We're not here to eliminate your sensitivity. We're here to help you make it sustainable. The sanctuary network had grown organically, like a garden tended by many hands, each new location blooming where it was most needed. Sage kept detailed maps that looked more like constellation charts than traditional geography, each sanctuary marked not by coordinates, but by the specific types of healing it offered. A counselor in the city had learned to place bowls of warm water on the floor during sessions, discovering that clients' grounded feet remembered safety in ways their minds had forgotten. A teacher from Vermont visited and left with a humming ritual that turned morning classroom chaos into attentive calm. A nurse from the night ward learned to carry what she called 3 breaths of lighthouse calm into each room, her presence becoming a moving harbor that made even the machines seem to beep more gently. These weren't the heroes of legend, but they were the ones who made daily life more livable for countless people. They worked in their own communities, often unknowingly part of a larger whole, simply following the intuitive call to nurture and heal. A shy librarian whose calm demeanor soothed anxious patrons, a soft-spoken chef whose food healed more than hunger, a gardener whose touch brought peace to both wilting plants and troubled minds, all connected by invisible threads of shared purpose. Captain Stella had found her truest calling in what the network called edge work, identifying souls who stood at the precipice of despair and offering them cosmic perspective that could transform endings into beginnings. Her fading powers had stabilized into something more precious than galactic awareness, the ability to help people see their pain within the larger context of universal healing. Echo's reality shifting abilities had evolved into what she called possibility architecture, creating spaces where trauma survivors could safely explore different versions of their stories, until they found the one that allowed for healing. Her sanctuaries existed in gentle spaces between realities, places where the impossible became possible and broken hearts could imagine themselves whole again. Mindbridge had discovered that his telepathy, when used with intention rather than overwhelm, could facilitate deep emotional healing that traditional therapy sometimes couldn't reach. He worked with people whose pain lived too deep for words, helping them communicate with parts of themselves that had been silenced by trauma. During quiet evening hours, Sage had begun writing letters that would become legendary within the network, not instruction manuals but love letters to future generations of healers, sharing wisdom earned through years of holding space for others' pain while learning to tend their own wounds. To those who feel too much, one letter began, remember that your sensitivity is not a flaw to be fixed, but a gift to be treasured. The world needs hearts like yours, hearts that can absorb pain and transform it into compassion, that can see through suffering to the beauty that lies beneath. But remember too that you are not required to carry every burden, heal every wound, or save every soul. Your first responsibility is to your own healing, your own wholeness, your own joy. The network's influence had spread through quiet channels, creating ripples of change that transformed how communities approached mental health and emotional support. Teachers learned to recognize empathic overwhelm in sensitive students. Healthcare workers discovered techniques for processing the emotional residue of difficult cases. Parents found resources for nurturing children whose gifts made them hypersensitive to their environments. As another autumn painted the coastal cliffs in familiar shades of gold and promise, Sage stood in the lens room watching Luna train a new group of healers in the art of sustainable compassion. The lighthouse beam continued its faithful rotation, now illuminating a world where sensitivity was increasingly recognized not as weakness, but as a form of strength that, properly supported, could heal the deepest wounds and guide the most lost souls safely home. River joined them at the Great Lens, their presence still the steady comfort it had been for over a decade. "Do you ever imagine what Marcus would think of all this?" River asked, watching the beam carry messages of hope to sanctuaries scattered across the globe. "I think he knew," Sage replied, feeling the truth settle in their bones like recognition. "I think he saw this future the way Luna sees colors, not as prediction, but as potential waiting for the right conditions to bloom." The lighthouse beam swept across the darkness, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of years spent learning that the greatest heroism often looked like the simplest acts of care, and that some victories were measured not in battles won, but in hearts mended and hope restored to a world learning to be gentle with itself. The letters began on a night when winter stars reflected in still water like scattered pearls, each one carrying its own quiet promise of guidance for souls yet to find their way home. Sage had discovered the old writing desk, tucked beneath the lighthouse's spiral stairs, its worn oak surface bearing the gentle impressions of decades of careful correspondence. Marcus had used it for weather reports and supply orders, but as Sage settled into the familiar chair with River's chamomile tea steaming beside them, they felt the desk's deeper purpose awakening, a place where wisdom could be distilled into words that might travel across time to comfort hearts not yet born. The first letter emerged like dawn breaking over still water, addressed not to any single person, but to the countless souls who would one day discover their own sensitivity was both gift and calling. "Dear fellow lighthouse keeper," Sage wrote, their pen moving with the same gentle rhythm as the beam rotating overhead. If you are reading this, you have likely learned that your heart was built with thinner walls than most, that you feel the world's pain as if it were your own blood flowing through your veins. This is not a flaw to be corrected, but a compass to be honored, pointing always toward where healing is most needed. Luna found them there the next morning, surrounded by pages filled with flowing script that seemed to glow with its own inner light. She had grown into a remarkable young woman whose gift for seeing emotions as colors had matured into something approaching prophecy, able to predict not just individual storms, but the larger weather patterns of human suffering and joy. "You're writing to tomorrow," Luna observed, settling beside Sage with the natural grace of someone who had learned to navigate emotional currents as easily as ocean tides. "I can see the golden threads connecting these words to hearts that haven't opened yet, bridges being built across time. Together, they crafted letters that wove practical wisdom through poetic understanding. To future empaths drowning in others' pain, Sage wrote of boundaries that were not walls, but gentle shores where one's own spirit could rest. To healers who had forgotten their own need for healing, they offered rituals of release, imagining absorbed sorrow as morning mist that could be breathed out into the vastness of sky, transformed and returned to the world as compassion. River contributed their steady wisdom to the correspondence, adding medical insights that grounded Sage's empathic understanding in practical care. They wrote about the physiology of compassion fatigue, the importance of recognizing when empathy had crossed the line into absorption, and simple techniques for maintaining emotional equilibrium while serving others. The letter to Luna, though she sat beside them, was written for the woman she would become when the lighthouse's care passed to younger hands. "My dearest bright star," Sage wrote, "your vision has taught us that even the darkest sorrow contains threads of gold, waiting to be recognized and honored. Lead with your heart, but remember to tend your own light first. You cannot guide others through storms you haven't learned to weather yourself." For River, Sage's handwriting softened into something that felt like a love song written in prose. "My anchor and my sail," the letter began. "You taught me that love itself is a form of healing when practiced with intention and care. You showed me how to draw clear lines between empathy and absorption, how to breathe deeply when the world felt too heavy. In your steady presence, I learned that two healers could create something stronger than either could achieve alone, not by combining our gifts, but by giving each other permission to rest." The most difficult letter was addressed to Marcus's memory, a conversation with a spirit that still moved through the lighthouse's stone walls and salt-weathered beams. "Old friend," Sage wrote, tears blurring the ink, "your light still shines, not just from this tower, but from every sanctuary, every gentle soul who learned from your patient wisdom. You prepared this place not for ships, but for hearts. And because of your faith in the unseen network, the light reaches farther now than you could have imagined." As winter deepened around the lighthouse, the letters began finding their way into the world through the sanctuary network. Photocopies traveled in coat pockets and care packages, tucked into library books, and taped beside mirrors in sanctuaries across the globe. A teacher in Vermont rewrote classroom rules into gentle reminders. A baker in Morocco seasoned his bread with the wisdom of feeding hearts before trying to fix them. A nurse in the city carried folded pages in her pocket, reading them during break times when the weight of others' suffering threatened to overwhelm her own carefully tended peace. Captain Stella contributed her cosmic perspective to the correspondence, writing about the importance of seeing individual pain within the larger context of universal healing. Echo's letters spoke to those whose gifts had left them feeling displaced from reality, offering gentle guidance for navigating between worlds. Mindbridge addressed the particular challenges of those who could hear thoughts and feel unspoken needs, reminding them that everyone was stronger than their struggles. The lighthouse became an informal postal hub, letters arriving from readers who had found comfort in Sage's words and wanted to share their own hard-won wisdom. A young empath from Australia wrote about creating emotional boundaries without building walls. A veteran from Canada shared techniques for processing, absorbed trauma through art. A mother from Brazil described teaching her sensitive daughter to see her gift as a superpower requiring proper training rather than suppression. As Sage sealed, another envelope addressed to a future healer in distant lands. They felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had found their truest purpose, not in dramatic rescues or legendary battles, but in the quiet, revolutionary act of helping others recognize the beauty and strength of their own sensitive hearts. The lighthouse beam continued its faithful rotation, now carrying not just coded messages to other sanctuaries, but the accumulated wisdom of thousands of souls learning to transform their gifts into service, creating a web of understanding that was slowly, gently teaching the world to be more tender with itself. Change arrived the way morning mist gathers on coastal cliffs, so gradually that you only noticed when the whole world seemed softer, more attentive to the tender places in human hearts. The letters had slipped into pockets and been tucked behind coffee shop counters, passed from hand to hand in hospital break rooms and school faculty lounges, and over the years, the world had begun to hum with a different kind of awareness, one that recognized sensitivity not as weakness but as a form of strength requiring careful cultivation. Sage watched these transformations with the quiet wonder of someone who had planted seeds without knowing what garden would grow. On buses, small signs appeared near the front reading "Quiet seats for hearts carrying heavy weather." Libraries offered not just books, but resting corners where soft lamps glowed like patient moons. And break rooms displayed gentle reminders. Remember to drink water after holding someone's sorrow, the way one hydrates after a long run. People had begun asking new questions, not just, "How are you?" but "How is your light today?" The Sanctuary Network had never been a single organization so much as a shared rhythm of care. And now that rhythm had taken root in the most unexpected places. A coffee shop in Prague reserved a corner table for quiet conversation, a small bell available for anyone who needed company but couldn't ask. A high school in Vermont began each morning with 60 seconds of humming, desks vibrating with gentle kindness until anxious shoulders loosened. A hospital downtown redesigned its stairwells, threading them with soft artwork and the barely audible loop of lullabies, creating refuges for staff between rooms where alarms were louder than breathing. River returned from their latest training session with stories that made Sage's heart expand like sunrise over still water. Emergency responders were learning to recognize emotional shock alongside physical trauma, carrying supplies for wounded hearts as well as broken bones. Police departments had begun partnering with empathic counselors who could de-escalate situations through presence rather than force. Even corporate environments were discovering that employees flourished when their emotional well-being received the same careful attention as their professional development. "It's becoming normal," River said, settling into their favorite chair with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed miracles becoming everyday occurrences. "What we do here, what the network teaches, it's not alternative healing anymore. It's just healing." Luna had grown into the network's most gifted guide, her ability to see emotions as colors, allowing her to teach others the visual vocabulary of different types of suffering. She worked with medical professionals developing their intuitive abilities, with teachers learning to read the emotional weather of their classrooms, with anyone whose work involved tending others' hearts. Her presence in the lighthouse had evolved from student to teacher. Her childhood gift matured into something approaching prophecy. Captain Stella had found her truest calling in what the network called edge work, identifying souls who stood at the precipice of despair and offering them cosmic perspective that could transform endings into beginnings. Her fading powers had stabilized into something more precious than galactic awareness, the ability to help people see their individual pain within the larger context of universal healing. Suicide rates in coastal communities had dropped significantly, not through dramatic interventions, but through the patient work of helping people remember they belong to something larger than their suffering. Echo's reality-shifting abilities had discovered their perfect application in trauma recovery, creating safe spaces where survivors could explore different versions of their stories until they found the one that allowed for healing. Her sanctuaries existed in gentle spaces between realities, places where the impossible became possible and broken hearts could imagine themselves whole again. Mindbridge had developed therapeutic techniques that combined traditional counseling with telepathic sensitivity, helping people communicate with parts of themselves that had been silenced by trauma. His work with veterans had become legendary not through publicity, but through the quiet word of mouth of souls who had found their way back to themselves through his patient listening. The network's Influence had spread through the most unexpected channels. Faye Barber in Detroit learned to listen for emotional distress in clients' small talk, offering gentle support along with haircuts. A librarian in Tokyo developed an intuitive system for recommending books that healed specific types of heartbreak. A chef in New Orleans discovered that certain combinations of spices could ease anxiety, turning his restaurant into an unofficial sanctuary where troubled souls found unexpected peace. Mental health support had become as accessible as physical health care in many communities. Emotional intelligence was valued alongside academic achievement. The stigma around sensitivity had begun to dissolve, replaced by recognition that empathic gifts were essential for creating the kind of world where everyone could thrive. One evening, as Sage and Luna stood together in the lens room, watching the lighthouse beam begin its patient rotation, Luna asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if you hadn't fallen from the stars that night?" Sage smiled, feeling the deep peace that comes from a life lived in service to something larger than oneself. "I think I would have still found my way to the light," they replied, "perhaps just a little slower. But the journey would have been the same, learning that the greatest power lies not in controlling the storms, but in being the steady beacon that guides others through them." Behind the cottage, they had begun planting what Luna called a memory garden, a flower for every soul they had helped find their way home. Not to count victories or measure success, but to honor the truth that each life was a garden and every act of kindness left seeds that would continue growing long after the gardener's hands had returned to earth. The lighthouse beam swept its faithful arc across the darkness, illuminating a world that was slowly, gently learning to be more tender with itself. Proving that some lights never truly go out, they simply become part of the larger brightness that guides all lost souls safely home. The garden behind the lighthouse had grown wild and beautiful over the decades, each bloom a living memory planted with muddy knees and whispered names. Sage moved among the flowers with the gentle deliberation of someone whose steps had learned to carry accumulated wisdom, their silver-streaked hair catching morning light like sea foam. Every flower held a story, the vibrant crimson roses for the young soldier whose nightmares had finally found peace, the delicate bluebells for the grieving widow who learned to carry sorrow with dignity, the resilient lavender for countless souls who had found their way back from despair's edge. River walked beside them at a pace that matched the tide, unhurried and attentive, their partnership having deepened into the kind of love that needed no words, only presence. Together they had weathered storms both literal and emotional, their hair growing grey together, their hands developing the same gentle creases, their love becoming a beacon, showing others that two healers could create something stronger than either could achieve alone. They would settle onto the weathered garden bench that had become their favorite spot for evening conversations, watching the lighthouse beam begin its patient rotation across water that held the deep blue of approaching twilight. "The purple irises are blooming again," River observed, voice carrying the warm satisfaction of someone who had witnessed countless seasons of renewal. "The ones we planted for that young teacher from Vermont who learned to hum away her students' anxiety." Sage smiled, remembering the shy woman who had arrived overwhelmed by her gift 15 years ago, convinced it was a burden. She had left with techniques for sustainable empathy and a humming practice that had transformed not just her classroom, but an entire school district's approach to emotional learning. The purple irises bloomed faithfully each spring, a living reminder that some seeds take time to show their true beauty. Luna appeared from the cottage, carrying Eleanor's chamomile tea, though Elena herself had passed peacefully 5 years earlier, leaving behind recipes and gentle wisdom that continued to nourish the lighthouse family. Luna had grown into a remarkable woman whose childhood gift for seeing emotions as colors had matured into something approaching art. She could walk into any space and immediately understand its emotional geography, knowing exactly where to place a chair so no one felt trapped, which corner needed more light to ease anxiety, how to arrange flowers in colors that would calm rather than overwhelm. "I've been thinking about succession," Luna said gently, settling beside them with natural grace. "Not because anyone's leaving, but because the network has grown beyond what any one lighthouse can coordinate. This garden has become a living map of healing, each plant representing a soul, each color and emotion transformed. It shows us that even the deepest sorrow can yield beauty. that every ending is simply a new beginning waiting to bloom. The Sanctuary network had evolved into something magnificent and organic, like a forest that had grown far beyond its original clearing. Sanctuaries bloomed across 6 continents, each operated by people who had learned to transform their sensitivity into service. The lighthouse had become not the center, but the heart, beating steadily while other organs performed their own vital functions. They had trained dozens of lighthouse keepers over the years, souls who arrived broken and left whole, carrying light to their own communities. Visitors still climbed the weathered steps, though they arrived more softly now, as if the very path taught people to lower their voices. A young father came carrying quiet panic he couldn't name, and Sage sat with him among the rosemary until he remembered the smell from his grandmother's kitchen and cried the way storms break when they finally find the sea. A retired teacher brought seed packets, and together they planted cosmos for students she worried she had failed. Each sprout an apology turning into blessing. The original Vindicators visited when the tide was right. Captain Stella, her hair now luminous white, would sit with Sage sharing quiet observations about the world's changing emotional landscape. Her cosmic awareness had refined into the ability to sense collective emotional shifts on a global scale, often speaking of a growing collective consciousness, a gentle awakening to interconnectedness. Echo would weave gentle illusions of memories into the garden, the scent of Marcus's pipe tobacco, the sound of Elena humming folk songs, the feeling of glowing moss that had once cradled a child fallen from stars. As evening settled over the coastal cliffs, painting the lighthouse walls in shades of golden promise, the weekly dinner tradition continued. The cottage table expanded to accommodate whoever needed nourishment, whether for body or spirit. Tonight brought a young doctor, struggling with empathic overwhelm in the emergency room, a retired teacher, whose gift for sensing children's emotional needs had left her feeling depleted, and a teenager, whose ability to absorb others' anxiety was making school unbearable. They gathered in cottage warmth, sharing food and stories, each person finding exactly what they needed in the gentle community that had formed around the lighthouse's steady beacon. The young doctor learned breathing techniques for processing absorbed trauma. The retired teacher discovered how to create boundaries that protected without isolating. The teenager found others who understood that sensitivity was not weakness, but strength requiring proper cultivation. Sage watched these connections form with quiet satisfaction. Feeling the profound peace that comes from knowing your work will continue long after your hands have returned to earth. The garden grew wild and beautiful, tended by many hands, visited by children from the local community who came to learn about its magic, planting their own small seeds of hope, learning early that kindness was a powerful force. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent into the sea, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sage closed their eyes, feeling the warmth of River's hand in theirs, the gentle hum of the garden around them. They felt the interconnectedness of all things, the earth beneath them, the sky above, the countless souls whose lives had touched theirs, each leaving a tiny, beautiful imprint. "It's been a good life, hasn't it?" River whispered, their voice a soft melody against the rustle of leaves. Sage squeezed their hand, a silent affirmation that spoke volumes. The garden, the lighthouse, the network, the love that had grown between them, it was all a testament to the quiet power of gentleness, the revolutionary act of choosing compassion in a world that often forgot its own tender heart. The lighthouse beam swept its faithful arc across the darkness, illuminating paths both literal and metaphorical, proving that some lights never truly go out. They simply become part of the larger brightness that guides all lost souls safely home. The morning came like a gentle exhale, with light that seemed softer than usual, as if the sun itself understood the profound transition taking place within the lighthouse's weathered walls. Sage had awakened before dawn, not from restlessness, but from the deep peace that comes when a soul recognizes its moment of completion. The sea had turned the color of old glass, holding memories in its depths, and the air carried that particular hush of late summer mornings when even the waves seemed to whisper more quietly. River found them in the garden, sitting among the flowers that held decades of memories, their silver-streaked hair catching what little light the sky offered, star-bright even by day. There was something luminous about Sage in that moment, as if they were becoming translucent, their essence beginning to merge with the light they had tended for so long. The garden seemed to lean closer around them, flowers tilting like attentive faces in conversation, as though everything living recognized the tenderness of a threshold. "The colors are beautiful this morning," Sage said softly, their voice light as mist. And River understood they were seeing something beyond the visible spectrum, the golden threads connecting every flower to every soul it represented, the silver streams of compassion flowing between the lighthouse and distant sanctuaries, the rainbow bridge that seemed to arc from the garden toward something beyond the horizon. Luna appeared as if summoned by an unspoken call, her gift for seeing emotions allowing her to perceive the profound transformation taking place. She moved with quiet grace, understanding without words that this was not an ending but a metamorphosis, the natural progression of a light that had learned to shine through countless hearts. In her hands, she carried a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a gift from a sanctuary in Japan. "It's a symbol," she explained softly, settling beside them on the weathered bench, "of the light that travels on, even when its source seems to dim." Sage took the bird, its smooth wood warm in their hand, and smiled with the profound contentment of someone who had found their truest purpose. "The light never truly dims, my dear," they whispered, their voice a soft rustle of leaves. "It simply becomes part of the larger brightness that guides others home." They made sandwiches for lunch out of habit more than hunger, simple and careful, ripe tomatoes, basil from the garden, soft bread brushed with olive oil and a pinch of salt. River wrapped each one in waxed paper, as if keeping a promise, while the lighthouse family gathered without being called, drawn by the same invisible threads that had once guided them to this sanctuary. Captain Stella arrived with cosmic awareness that sensed the profound shift taking place, her white hair catching the afternoon light like captured starlight. Echo appeared with gentle illusions that made the garden seem to glow from within, her paper cranes rustling at drafts only they could feel. Mindbridge came carrying the telepathic understanding that some moments were too sacred for words, offering silence the way others offer chairs. "I'm ready to pass the beam," Sage whispered, their voice carrying the weight of years and the lightness of someone who had made peace with letting go. "The lighthouse has been waiting for you since you first arrived as a child, who could see colors in feelings. Luna, you understand what I'm only beginning to glimpse, that our work was never about individual healing, but about teaching the world to tend its own light. The transition happened not with ceremony, but with the gentle inevitability of tide changing." Luna's hands joined Sage's on the lighthouse controls, feeling the ancient mechanism respond to her touch, as if it had been waiting for this moment since the night she first walked the coastal path. The beam seemed to pulse with recognition, its rotation becoming somehow more purposeful, more alive. As evening painted the sky in shades of rose and gold that mirrored the aurora of Sage's arrival, the old friends gathered closer. Stories were told the way lullabies are sung, not to inform but to cradle. There were remembrances of early days, of hospital corridors and lighthouse stairs, of letters written at midnight and answers arriving like shorebirds at dawn. No one hurried. Every pause belonged. Eleanor's spirit seemed present too, along with Marcus's patient wisdom and the countless souls who had found healing within these walls. The garden held them all, every person who had ever been touched by the lighthouse's gentle influence, every heart that had learned to carry its sensitivity as strength rather than burden. "Every power is just a way of loving," Sage said, eyes on the slow-turning light. "We mistake it for many things, but it's always love." As twilight deepened, Sage's transformation reached its completion. They didn't disappear or fade away. Instead, they seemed to become part of the light itself, their essence merging with the lighthouse beam that had been their life's work. With a gentle sigh that carried the peace of 1,000 years, Sage closed their eyes, their breath becoming one with the soft breeze that rustled through the garden. River felt the shift like sunrise, profound loss transformed into something larger, more beautiful than grief could contain. Luna stood in the lens room as the beam began its rotation, feeling Sage's presence not as memory, but as living guidance. The light carried new qualities now, deeper compassion, broader understanding, the accumulated wisdom of a soul that had learned to transform pain into healing. The lighthouse beam continued its faithful rotation, now carrying forward not just Marcus's legacy or Sage's wisdom, but the accumulated light of countless souls who had learned to transform their sensitivity into service. Messages traveled to distant sanctuaries and across the globe. Hearts felt the shift. A teacher in Vermont found sudden inspiration. A baker in Morocco discovered his bread carrying extra comfort. A nurse in the city noticed her presence bringing unusual peace. And somewhere in the space between one heartbeat and the next, between one wave and another, Sage's light continued to shine, proving that some forms of love are too vast for any single lifetime to contain, woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, forever guiding, forever soothing, forever reminding that no one has to suffer alone. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. So everything's going to be okay, man.